Welcome back. Today, we will be covering Chapter 4, Epoxy Application. Let's get started. Chapter 4 really is the core of epoxy application. What we will be covering today is tools, mixing and curing rates, the application process, Fleck and other additives, handling issues, epoxy repairs, and some advanced techniques. All of the tools we will be covering are recommended from actual installers and chosen for ease of use and ease of application. Notch squeegee with frame or foam squeegee for spreading the epoxy across the floor. Spiked shoes for walking on epoxy during applications. You will be amazed how much this one item can affect your application. A 3/8 inch nap roller or 1/4 inch nap roller with frame. Roller is personal preference. Spiked porcupine roller for popping bubbles during application. A wet vacuum for picking up water and loose debris from the floor and in between cracks. A paddle mixer for ensuring a proper mix. Cure rates. Normal cure time for MuscleGloss epoxy is 24 hours. Standard work time, the time you will have to apply the epoxy before it begins to set, is 30 minutes. MuscleGloss epoxy does not have a pot life and should only be left in the bucket for the short amount of time it takes to mix parts A and part B. Temperature and humidity significantly affect the work time of the epoxy and may affect the total cure time. The colder the air temperature and lower the humidity, the slower MuscleGloss will set. The warmer the air temperature and higher the humidity, the faster MuscleGloss will set. When air temperature is high, you will have less work time to apply the epoxy. Set time equals the time you have to work with the epoxy. Cure time equals the time it takes for the surface to harden. Mixing. Proper mixing is crucial for a good cure. The best way to mix all MuscleGloss products is by using a power drill with a paddle attachment. Mix for approximately 2 minutes at a low drill speed, 300 to 500 RPM. Be sure to scrape any excess from the sides of the pail. Move the paddle in circles around the inside edge of the pail from bottom to top. You should not see any bubbles in the mixture. Application process. Installation conditions are ideal when air temperature is between 64 and 74 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity is under 44%. Do not apply MuscleGloss at temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If high temperature is a concern, apply during the morning or evening when temperatures are lowest. For parts of the country where humidity is high year-round, apply during the time of day when it's at its lowest, usually at night or early in the morning. You must wait at least 30 days to apply MuscleGloss to newly poured cement. This allows time for moisture to evaporate and concrete to fully harden. This will allow MuscleGloss to adhere properly. Vapor barriers. Vapor barriers are used to seal moisture at the bottom of concrete slabs. This protects concrete from hydrostatic pressure, which will cause water to rise up through the surface of the concrete. Hydrostatic pressure will ruin any concrete floor covering. Usually, vapor barriers are installed directly under concrete slabs. Before applying MuscleGloss, ask your client if a vapor barrier is in place. If there is an existing vapor barrier, you will not need to provide any additional moisture protection. If no vapor barrier is in place, ask your client if the concrete has any known moisture issues. Whether the issue occurs seasonally or year-round, you should seal the concrete with Muscle Prime before applying epoxy. You will also need to test for moisture yourself. If you find any amount of moisture while testing, use Muscle Prime. If your client reports a moisture issue, but you do not find moisture while testing, you should still use Muscle Prime. It is best to play it safe. Muscle Prime application. Use Muscle Prime as a moisture barrier on concrete surfaces when moisture is a concern or a known issue. We also recommend using a coat of Muscle Prime on old or worn floors. This will aid in achieving adhesion. In this case, only a thin layer of Muscle Prime is necessary. Alternatively, if no moisture is present, you could apply a thin coat of epoxy instead of Muscle Prime, and then add a second coat of epoxy at normal thickness. Muscle Prime has a pot life of 90 minutes. Do not mix more product than can be used in that period of time. In a gallon plastic bucket, add all of Muscle Prime Part A to Part B. Mix the parts completely with a paddle mixer. The mixture should end up being a consistent yellow color. Do not leave any unmixed residue on the sides of the bucket. Muscle Prime must be applied immediately after mixing. Once mixed, pour the entire contents of the bucket onto the floor in a horizontal bead. Spread the product out with a brush or roller. Muscle Prime should dry to a clear coat in 24 hours. Oil Stop. Oil Stop is an epoxy primer you can use over grease and oil stains. Oil and grease stains will cause epoxy to lift, and it is essential that you seal concrete with Oil Stop when needed. Use Oil Stop on areas where oil has become embedded in the concrete and cannot be removed with surface cleaning. You can apply Oil Stop over the entire concrete surface or spot treat in small areas. Apply Oil Stop when air temperature is between 55 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure the substrate is dry and free of contaminants and curing compounds. Thoroughly mix Part A and Part B. Apply with a brush, roller, or sprayer. Product should cure in 2 to 4 hours. Oil Stop is compatible with all petroleum-based oils and greases. Multiple coats. In many cases, only a single coat of MuscleGloss epoxy is necessary. However, we recommend using multiple coats in high-traffic areas. For airplane hangars and firehouses, we advise applying either a coat of Muscle Prime and a coat of epoxy, or 2 coats of epoxy at the very minimum. When putting down multiple layers, you will need to allow each layer to dry for 24 hours. After 24 hours, check that the coating has hardened, and then lightly sand it before applying your next layer. This will help you achieve long-term adhesion. Adding Fleck or non-skid grip. We recommend using non-skid grip in areas where you need maximum protection from slipping. To apply non-skid grip, add it directly into the epoxy mixture. Do this after Part A and B have been combined, but before they have been mixed. Then, mix everything together. Anti-slip Fleck provides decoration and minimal protection from slipping. Apply anti-slip Fleck immediately after you have applied the epoxy. We recommend using a handheld seed spreader to broadcast the Fleck evenly across the floor. You can also spread the Fleck by hand by throwing it across the floor in an underhanded toss. You do not need both Fleck and non-skid grip. However, if you want maximum protection from slipping, you can use both Fleck and non-skid grip together. Application issues. Bubbling, or fish eyes. Bubbles can appear as small pinheads or as large as 1 inch in diameter. They can appear throughout the entire floor or in clusters. Outgassing. Outgassing happens when air rises from the surface of the concrete. This is a normal occurrence in all concrete surfaces. However, excessive outgassing can cause bubbling. Temperature increases can cause excessive outgassing. When temperature increases, air and moisture vapor in the concrete heats up and expands, creating bubbles. To avoid this, never apply MuscleGloss when the air temperature is over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If temperature is high year-round, apply epoxy in the morning or evening when temperatures are lower. Direct sunlight can also raise the temperature of the epoxy while it is curing. If you cannot diffuse the sunlight, wait to apply the epoxy at a time of day when sunlight is not directly over your work area. Overmixing. Overmixing will whip air into the epoxy. Always use a paddle mixer with a low drill speed of 300 to 500 RPM. Overrolling. The best way to spread out the epoxy is with a squeegee. Rollers can create bubbles. Try to use them as little as possible. When you do use a roller, move it slowly over the epoxy and do not keep rolling the same area. Airflow. Excessive air movement over the surface of the epoxy can cause the top layer of the coating to dry more quickly than the rest of the epoxy. A skin may form over the top of the floor. When this happens, air trapped in the coating cannot be released and bubbles form. To avoid this, make sure any fans are either turned off or directed away from newly applied epoxy. Excessive heat over 90 degrees Fahrenheit will cause the epoxy to cure too quickly. Air normally present in the coating cannot escape and bubbles will form. To avoid this issue, never apply MuscleGloss when air temperature is over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Repairs. Always keep a spiked porcupine roller with you at all times. Use the porcupine roller to pop any bubbles that form while you're applying the epoxy. It is much easier to correct the issue this way than it is after the epoxy is cured and the bubbles have hardened. If the bubbles have hardened, you will need to sand or grind them out. Large bubbles may require hand grinding before sanding. Use a medium grit sandpaper on a rotary disc scrubber. Always feather edge all imperfections. Vacuum and clean up any dust. Once the surface has been smoothed and is clean, recoat the area. Depending on how many bubbles you have, you may need to correct the entire floor or just a few areas. Cloudy or dull coating. A cloudy or dull film may appear over the surface of the coating after the cure time. There are a couple of factors that cause this. The first cause is excessive humidity in the area where the epoxy was applied. To avoid this issue, do not apply epoxy when relative humidity is over 75%. You may be able to lower humidity by using fans to increase air circulation. The second cause is excessive moisture in or on the concrete surface. To avoid this issue, be sure to eliminate all water before applying epoxy. For repairs, test the problem area with a water-moistened rag to see if the cloudiness can be wiped off. If this works, wipe down the entire area. If it does not work, sand the surface and apply a thin new coat. Soft or tacky coating after a 24-hour cure. Insufficient mixing is usually the cause of a soft or tacky coating. Always be sure to empty the entire contents of both Part A and B. For repairs, first, give the epoxy more time to cure. Generally, if it is not cured within 24 hours, it is not going to. You will need to scrape up the epoxy. If the epoxy is partially cured and cannot be removed with a scraper alone, use muscle strip to completely remove the epoxy. Thoroughly clean the surface and apply new epoxy. Note, although it does not happen often, it is possible the issue was caused by a bad batch. Every MuscleGloss product has a quality control code. Please call us if you suspect you have received a bad batch. With the QC number, we can investigate to determine whether the cause was a bad batch. Peeling, flaking, and/or lack of adhesion. The coating may separate from the concrete base or from a previous layer, in either small or large areas. Here are the causes and the ways to avoid these issues. When a primer was not used. If there is a moisture issue or the concrete is stained with oil, the epoxy will lift from the floor. Lifting may occur across the entire floor or in isolated areas, possibly where there are stains. When oil stains are present, be sure to use oil stop to clean and seal oil-stained areas. Inadequate surface preparation. If the concrete is not properly etched before the epoxy application, the epoxy will not create a durable bond with the floor. Always sand, grind, or acid etch the floor before applying epoxy. Excessive moisture on the surface of the concrete. If moisture is sealed into the concrete, warmer temperatures will bring it to the surface of the coating. At the surface, it will not be able to vaporize and escape. Instead, the moisture will put pressure on the epoxy and create blisters at the surface. Often, the blisters will grow as moisture and vapor accumulate beneath the surface of the epoxy. You can verify that this is the issue by breaking a blister open to see if moisture is trapped beneath it. Always check for a vapor barrier. Use muscle prime if there is no vapor barrier and moisture is a potential issue. Conducting repairs. If the issue is present throughout the entire floor, strip to bare concrete and sand or grind the surface. If no primer was used before, apply muscle prime. Wait 24 hours for the coating to cure, sand, and then apply epoxy. If the issue appears in isolated areas, the cause is likely a grease or oil stain. Key the perimeter with a sharp knife or portable saw and remove the coating to bare concrete. Confirm there is a stain. Apply a layer of oil stop and allow it to dry for 24 hours. Next, sand the surface and apply epoxy. Wrinkling of the surface of the coating. This is a rare occurrence, but it sometimes does happen. Here are the causes and how to avoid them. Cold concrete surface temperatures. To avoid this issue, never apply epoxy when the surface temperature of the concrete is below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Conducting repairs. Thoroughly sand and/or grind the floor to a completely smooth surface. Vacuum and clean up all dust. Apply a thin coat of epoxy. Note, if there is moisture coming up from within the surface of the concrete, it is usually because the slab has no vapor barrier. If this is the case, there is no easy way to eliminate the problem. We recommend removing all of the coating and applying 1 or 2 coats of muscle prime, and then recoating with epoxy. Solid lumps in or on the surface of the coating. Here are the causes and ways to avoid this issue. Lint from a roller sleeve. To avoid this, only use lint-free rollers. Dust or dirt that was not removed from the surface of the floor before the epoxy application. Always be sure to remove all dust and debris before applying the epoxy. Dirty or contaminated equipment used during mixing or the application. Always be sure your equipment is free of dust before you begin the application process. Conducting repair. Large lumps may require hand grinding before sanding. Always feather edge all imperfections. Thoroughly sand the lumpy floor area with a medium grit sandpaper. You can also use a grinder. Vacuum and clean up all resulting dust. Apply a thin coat of epoxy. Coverage variations. This is when coverage rates are less than specified. All surfaces are different. More porous or damaged concrete will absorb more of the epoxy and you will get less coverage. Always get a little more epoxy than you will need for a project, especially if the concrete is very porous or damaged. Depending on the nature of the surface, you can need anywhere from 20 to 50% more epoxy. The more imperfections the surface has, the more epoxy you will need. If you are unsure of how much additional epoxy you will require, please contact a MuscleGloss sales representative. Advanced techniques. As you begin to work with customers on the job, you will likely receive many requests for custom projects. Here's an overview of installs your clients may ask for. Acid staining. Acid staining allows plain concrete slabs to be transformed with striking colors and designs. Homeowners, builders, and designers are attracted to the unique outcomes that can be achieved with different colors and application techniques. The results are only limited by the creativity of those involved in the project. Acid stains are translucent, and the end color they will produce will vary depending on the color and condition of the concrete they are applied to. Every slab of concrete will absorb the color in varying degrees of intensity, which creates natural color variations and brings distinction to each project. Most acid stains are made from a mixture of water, hydrochloric acid, and acid-soluble metallic salts. They work by penetrating the surface of the concrete and reacting with chemicals already present in all concrete materials. The acid in the stain etches the surface and allows the metallic salts to better penetrate the concrete. Once the stain chemically reacts, it becomes a permanent part of the concrete. Currently, MuscleGloss does not carry acid stains. Here's a basic installation guide to give you an idea of what it takes to complete an acid stain application. This is not meant to be a comprehensive guide, but a quick overview of that process. The steps you will need to take will vary based on the acid stain you use, the substrate you're applying it to, and the effect you want. Applying to concrete. Clean the surface the stain will be applied to and ensure it is free of any unwanted defects. Do a test spot. Because the stain will react differently with each surface it is applied to, it's best to perform an on-site test to get an idea of what the final outcome will look like. Apply the stain. You can apply the acid stain with a hand sprayer, brush, sponge, or mop. Using a sprayer is recommended for the best results. Normally, at least 2 coats are required. Wait 2 to 4 hours between coats. Remove the acid stain and neutralize the surface. This will ensure proper adhesion of the sealant. Use a solution of half a pound of baking soda and 5 gallons of water. Apply with a cotton or rayon mop. Once you have mopped with the solution, mop twice with clean water and allow the floor to dry for 24 hours. Seal the floor. Sealing the floor will add glossiness to the stain and protect the finish. We recommend using MuscleGloss UV top coat. Optional scoring. Scoring can be used to create patterns in the concrete. You can score before or after applying the acid stain. If you score before staining and sealing the concrete, the score lines will be stained with the rest of the floor. If you score after staining and sealing the floor, score lines will reveal the true color of the original concrete and create the illusion of grout lines. Decals. Before doing anything, Make sure the decal you're going to use is paintable. Ask the company that makes the decal if it is suitable for applying an epoxy clear coat over it. Prep the floor as you normally would and apply the epoxy. If you apply any fleck or grip, do not apply them in the area where the decal is going. Let the epoxy dry completely and then apply the decal to the epoxy. Let the decal sit overnight and then apply a top coat over the floor and decal. The decal will look like it was embedded into the epoxy. Grout line effect. You can use the grout line effect to make an endless combination of designs and patterns. Clean and prep the area as you normally would. Lightly pencil in the lines onto the concrete floor. Apply epoxy over the pencil lines with at least a 3-inch roller. Allow the lines to dry for 24 hours. Doing this will allow you to blend the edges of the lines with the rest of the floor. Choose painter's tape that is the width you want the lines to be and put the tape down in the center of the lines. Next, epoxy the entire floor. Let the epoxy sit for 20 to 30 minutes and remove the tape. Do not let the epoxy harden on the tape. You will not be able to remove the tape once the epoxy has cured. Checkerboard pattern. The checkerboard pattern is a very popular design you may run into. You can either apply white epoxy across the entire floor and then section off squares and apply black epoxy over the white epoxy, or tape off squares and apply black and white epoxy in sections. Choking with Fleck. It is possible to apply so much Fleck to the floor that the color below is not visible at all. We recommend using a base coat of beige colored epoxy. After applying the epoxy, overload it with Fleck. Once the coating has cured for 24 hours, lightly sand the surface and apply a clear coat. After the clear coat is cured, you will need to sweep any excess Fleck from the floor. Note, whenever you're using epoxy to create lines and designs, you will probably use more epoxy than normal. If you are making a small design and using several different colors, we recommend buying sample sizes. Pearlescent and metallic epoxy. MuscleGloss does not currently carry pearlescent or metallic epoxy coatings, but may in the future. Pearlescent and metallic coatings create a unique pattern in the flooring on their own. Congratulations, you've completed Chapter 4. Now it's time once again to get out your pencil and paper so we can take the self-quiz. Question 1. What is the purpose of wearing spiked shoes? Number 2. How much working time do you have when working with 100% solids epoxy? 3. What is the ideal temperature range for installing epoxy? Number 4. Why is temperature and humidity important when installing epoxy? Question 5. Name 3 issues that can cause installation problems. 6. Describe acid staining. And finally, why is it important to clean up after each workday on a job site?